The ad was 11 lines long. I remember that specifically because I counted them twice. Once when I first found it, and once when I was already in my car with the address typed into my GPS and the desert beginning to replace the city behind me. 11 lines, no company name, no HR contact, no benefits language, just a job title, night auditor, and a location described as rural New Mexico, 40 miles outside Albuquerque, and a pay rate that I'm not going to repeat here because if I say the number out loud, you'll understand immediately why I didn't ask more questions. And understanding that too early makes me look like exactly the kind of person this place was designed to attract. I had been unemployed for 6 weeks. My apartment lease had 1 month left on it, and my savings account had enough in it to cover either the last month's rent or a single tank of gas, not both. I had applied to 43 jobs in the previous 30 days. I know it was 43 because I kept a spreadsheet, the kind of compulsive record-keeping that unemployed people develop to simulate the feeling of productivity, the feeling that something is being tracked, that the days have a shape. 43 applications, 4 responses, 2 automated rejections, 1 interview that ended with the hiring manager pausing mid-sentence, looking at my resume, and then at me, and then back at the resume, and saying, "We'll be in touch," in a tone of voice that meant the exact opposite. And the Craigslist ad, which I found at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday while eating cereal over my kitchen sink because I hadn't done dishes in 4 days. The listing was in the administrative section. Whoever posted it knew what they were doing. Night auditor sounds like a desk job, a spreadsheet job, something a person with my background could do with their eyes closed. Sit at a counter from midnight to 6 in the morning, log any guests, answer the phone. Do not leave the lobby. The motel was called the Solano del Muerto. I looked that up too later, when I was already committed, when the application had been sent via a plain email address and the response had come back in under 4 minutes, at 11:15 at night, confirming my start date as that Sunday. Solano del Muerto. I have a year of community college Spanish. I know what muerto means. I told myself it was probably historical. I told myself a lot of things that week. I drove out on Sunday afternoon to arrive by 11:30. I'd allowed extra time for the desert. I had never spent significant time in the high desert of New Mexico, and I had some vague expectation of grandeur. Orange mesas, dramatic sky, the cinematic emptiness you see in car commercials. What I got instead was something flatter and stranger. The land didn't open up. It compressed. The Joshua trees that appeared about 20 miles outside the city were not majestic. They were twisted in ways that suggested not wind, but something more deliberate, as if each tree had been wrung slightly by hand at some point in its growth and had learned to hold that position. The highway thinned, not the lanes. The highway itself seemed to lose confidence. The road markings faded and then stopped. There were no other cars in either direction for the last 15 miles, which I know because I checked my mirrors compulsively, the way you do when you feel watched. The motel appeared without warning. There was no sign on the highway indicating it was coming. One moment there was nothing on either side of the road but scrubland and dark, and then my headlights caught the pink glow of a neon vacancy sign buzzing against an ink-black sky, and the building was simply there. A long, low structure with 12 numbered doors visible from the road, a covered walkway running their length, a gravel parking lot containing exactly 2 vehicles, and a lobby window lit from the inside with the particular yellow-white of fluorescent light. The word Vaxati blinked in the pink neon like something trying to speak through a failing connection. I sat in my car in the parking lot for about 45 seconds. I'm not sure what I was waiting for. Some kind of internal permission, maybe. Some part of myself that needed one more moment to register the silence before I walked into it. That silence. I want to try to describe it accurately because it is the first thing that was wrong, and it was so subtle that I almost filed it under road fatigue and let it go. The desert should not have been silent. This close to Albuquerque, there should have been highway noise, distant, smeared, but present. There should have been animals. The high desert is full of life after dark, coyotes, insects, nighthawks. There should have been wind, which the desert always has. There was none of it. The silence was not the absence of sound. It had texture, it had pressure, It pushed back against my ears the way the silence in a very deep room pushes back, the kind of silence that makes you aware of your own breathing and immediately self-conscious about its rhythm. I got out of the car. The gravel under my feet was the only sound in every direction. The lobby door opened before I knocked. The man standing in it was gaunt in the specific way of someone who has been eating adequately but sleeping very little for a very long time. Not malnourished, just hollowed. His name was Terrence. He was already wearing a jacket. He had a bag over his shoulder. He had been standing at that door waiting for headlights in the parking lot, and the moment he saw mine, he had picked up his bag, because Terrence was leaving the moment I arrived, and everything about his posture communicated that the distance between him and this building was a resource he intended to increase as rapidly as possible, without running. He didn't ask my name. He handed me a laminated sheet, a ring of keys, and a thermos of coffee in 3 rapid, practiced movements, the way someone passes a baton who is not going to watch what happens to it next. He said 3 things. He said, "Don't touch the bell unless it rings first." He said, "Don't unlock room 9 for any reason." He said, "Don't go outside after 2 a.m. Then he walked past me to the truck idling in the far corner of the parking lot, the one I hadn't noticed when I pulled in, the engine already running, and he got in and he drove away without looking back. Not a glance. Not a wave. The truck's taillights disappeared around the curve in the road in under 20 seconds, and the silence filled back in behind it like water closing over a stone. I stood alone in the parking lot with a laminated sheet and a ring of keys and a thermos. I looked down at the gravel. In the far corner of the lot, where Terrence's truck had been idling, I could see tire tracks leading from the road to the side of the building. Deep, heavy impressions, something large. They stopped at the building's eastern wall. No vehicle, no footprints continuing from them. Whatever had made those tracks had driven here and arrived and then simply was not anymore. The way a sentence stops in the middle of a... I turned around and went inside. The lobby of the Solano del Muerto was smaller than I expected and more considered. Someone had at some point cared about this room. There was a woven textile on one wall in geometric desert patterns, faded to the color of old terracotta. The front desk was solid wood, scarred and glossy with decades of use. A rack of keys on the wall behind the desk. 12 hooks, 10 of them occupied. A physical guest ledger, black hardcover, sitting open to a fresh page. A phone with an old handset. And on the corner of the desk, brass and tarnished and sitting very still in the fluorescent light, the bell. It was a standard hotel registration bell, the kind you tap to summon a clerk. Palm-sized, dome-shaped, the push button on top slightly worn from use. Tarnished to the color of old pennies. I noticed it the way you notice anything on an unfamiliar desk, cataloged it, moved on. I spread the laminated sheet under the light and started reading. The header read, in plain center type, Operational Guidelines, Solano del Muerto Night Staff. The first 4 rules were unremarkable. Log all arrivals in a physical ledger. Do not use the computer after 1 a.m. Keep the lobby lights on at all times. Do not prop open the exterior fire doors. If I had read only those 4 rules, I would have understood this as a standard set of night shift parameters for an isolated property, the kind of list any cautious motel owner might put together for a new employee working alone. Detailed but reasonable. The language of liability management. Rule 5 was where the language changed, not dramatically, not all at once. The shift was subtle enough that I read through it the first time and felt only a mild unease, the kind you feel when someone phrases something in a way that is technically professional but emotionally wrong. Rule 5 read, if a guest arrives between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. and their name is not in the ledger, do not check them in. Tell them the motel is full. Do not make eye contact while doing so. The instruction itself was containable. Motels turn away guests. The no eye contact clause was strange, but I could construct a reasonable interpretation. Problem, guests, history of confrontation. I kept reading. Rule 6, if the phone rings more than 7 times, do not answer it on the 8th ring. The 8th ring is not the phone. I read that 3 times. I want to be precise about what happened in me when I read Rule 6 because it wasn't fear. Not yet. It was something colder and more cognitive, the sensation of a load-bearing assumption giving way. The 8th ring is not the phone. That phrase is constructed grammatically as fact, not mourning, not speculation. Fact. Whoever wrote that rule was not hedging. They were documenting. They had been here when the phone rang 8 times, and they had learned what the 8th ring was, and they had written this rule so that the next person would not have to learn it the same way. Rule 7 was written in slightly different ink, as though added after the original document was complete, as though someone returned to the desk on a different night with something they needed to add. If you hear your name spoken from outside the front door, do not respond. It does not know your name yet. Responding teaches it. I set the sheet down. I picked it back up. I read rules 8 through 11, which were standard. No, genuinely standard, almost aggressively so, as if designed to give me a resting place, a moment of normalcy in which to breathe before whatever came next. Check the exterior lights at 3 a.m. Do not leave the coffee maker on unattended. The back office filing system is alphabetical by checkout date. Then rules 12, 13, and 14. They had been crossed out, not carelessly, meticulously, thoroughly, with the specific intent of making them permanently unreadable. Multiple layers. The first crossing was from a ballpoint pen, the familiar blue-black of a cheap office pen, applied in horizontal strokes. Over that, someone had added a layer of thick black marker, the industrial kind. Over both of those, something darker and waxier, something I couldn't immediately identify, applied in pressing strokes that had slightly warped the laminate in places. 3 separate people, I understood, had independently decided that these 3 rules needed to be unmade, not hidden, unmade. Beneath the crossouts, in red pen, cramped and small and slightly tilted as if written quickly in poor light, "These cost too much. Don't look for them." I photographed the sheet with my phone. 4 photos from different angles, zooming in on the redacted section, trying to catch any letter or word bleeding through. In every photo, the crossout was solid, perfectly, completely opaque. But when I compared the 3rd photo to the 4th, taken less than 20 seconds apart, the sheet in the same position under the same light, the shape of the black marks was different. Not dramatically, just slightly, as if something beneath the redaction had shifted its position while I wasn't watching, as if the thing being covered was not ink. I put my phone in my pocket. I looked at the lobby. The lights buzzed their single long fluorescent note. The desert pushed its pressurized silence against the glass of the front window. Outside, the vacancy sign blinked pink and patient in the dark. I picked up the thermos. I poured coffee into its cap. The coffee was still hot, which meant Terrence had made it within the last 30 minutes, which meant Terrence had been here until very recently, which meant at some point tonight he had been standing in this exact spot, at this exact desk, and had decided that the most useful thing he could do for whoever came next was fill a thermos. I sat down in the desk chair. I set the laminated sheet where I could see it. I opened the physical ledger to the current page. I picked up a pen and I waited for the night to begin paying for itself. At 12:47 a.m., I began my first logbook audit. The process was simple. Cross-reference the physical ledger against the keyboard to confirm which rooms were occupied and which were vacant. Verify that the logged guest count matched the number of missing keys. Note any discrepancies. Standard night audit procedure. The kind of task that takes 10 minutes and requires no decisions. I started at key hook number 1. Rooms 1 through 8, keys present. Rooms vacant. Consistent with the ledger, which showed no active guests. Room 10, key present. Room vacant. Room 11, key present. Room vacant. Room 12, key present. Room vacant. Room 9. Room 9's hook was empty. I checked the ledger. No guests logged. No active booking. No name. No arrival time. No duration. I checked the space under the desk where extra keys were sometimes stored in older properties. Nothing. I went through every drawer in the front desk. Rubber bands, a box of paper clips, 2 dried-out pens, a stapler, a small spiral notebook filled with what appeared to be maintenance schedules. No key. I went to the back office and checked the pegboard over the secondary desk, the surface of which was covered in post-it notes, all of them blank except one which read Terrence with a phone number. No key. I came back to the front desk and looked at the keyboard for a long moment. 1 hook. Empty. 1 room. Unaccounted for. I walked to the lobby window and looked at room 9. The motel's exterior was lit by a row of low-mounted path lights along the walkway, casting everything in a flat amber wash. Room 9 was the third door from the far end of the building. Its curtains were closed, and beneath the door, in the narrow gap between the door's base and the walkway concrete, there was a thin line of light. Warm, yellow-white, the specific color of a bedside lamp. Someone was in room 9, or something was on in room 9, which was not the same thing. And I tried to hold that distinction carefully as I picked up the desk phone and dialed the extension for room 9. The instructions on the phone's faceplate listed the extension as simply 09. I dialed it. It rang once, a clean, standard telephone ring. On the second ring, the line opened. The specific silence of a picked-up phone background removed, replaced by the intimate near silence of a held receiver. I said hello. A pause, long enough that I almost said it again. Then a voice. I cannot tell you the specific things it said without telling you things about my life that I have never told anyone, and I won't do that here. What I will tell you is this. The voice used a name. Not my name as it appears on any document, not on my application, not on my driver's license, not on anything I had provided to this job or could have provided. It used the name my mother called me when I was 9 years old, the shortened version of a nickname that existed only between the two of us, that she used specifically when she was calling me in from playing outside to come in for dinner. A two-syllable fragment of sound that functioned as a private language. My mother has been dead for 3 years. The voice said it twice, the second time with the exact rising inflection she used when dinner was getting cold, and she needed me to hear that the call was genuine, not optional. Then the line went dead. I stood at the front desk with the phone in my hand, and I did not move for what was probably 30 seconds, but experienced as much longer, the way time behaves in the aftermath of something the brain hasn't fully categorized yet, something it is turning over and over, checking for a seam, somewhere it can be explained. I looked at room 9. The line of light beneath the door was gone. The room was dark, and in the window behind the closed curtain, for exactly the duration of one breath, mine, shallow, involuntary, a silhouette, standing, facing outward, not moving, a silhouette, standing, facing outward, not moving, not reaching for the curtain, simply standing there the way something stands when it has learned that stillness is more effective than motion. Then the curtain was just a curtain. I set the phone down very carefully, the way you set down something that has just changed what it is to you. At 1:15 a.m., the bell rang. I want to be precise about the sound because I have replayed it many times since, and precision feels important. It was not muffled or distant. It was clear and close and sharp. The specific metallic note of a quality brass bell struck cleanly. One ring. A single, deliberate, complete note that hung in the lobby for a moment the way quality sound does, and then was gone. I looked at the bell. It was sitting exactly where it had been sitting all night, on the corner of the desk, motionless. Nothing was near it. No vibration, no draft, no explanation that I could immediately construct. I remembered Terrence's first instruction, don't touch the bell unless it rings first. It had rung first. I reached for it, then stopped. The rule didn't say touch it after it rings. The rule said don't touch it unless. The conditional created a permission, not an instruction. I left it where it was. I picked it up anyway, 3 minutes later, when the parking lot outside remained empty and the bell had not rung a second time and I needed to do something with my hands that was not staring at room 9's dark window. I picked it up and I turned it over. The interior of the bell was hollow. Completely, cleanly hollow. No clapper, no mechanism, no small metal ball, no hanging striker, no physical component that could produce sound through contact. The inside surface was smooth, tarnished brass, and that was all. I shook it. Nothing. I tapped the outside with my knuckle. It produced a dull, dead knock, the sound of a bell that is essentially decorative, that has no resonant capacity because it has no internal component to resonate against. I set it down. 3 minutes after that, headlights appeared in the parking lot. He came to the lobby door, and I buzzed him in. Middle-aged, rumpled, a duffel bag over one shoulder. He had the specific appearance of someone at the far end of a long drive, not haggard, just wrung out, carrying the residue of hours in a car. He asked for a room. He said his name was Marcus Webb. He paid in cash, exact change, as though he'd counted it out in the car before coming in. I found him room 4, logged the name, handed over the key. He thanked me and walked back out into the parking lot toward room 4. I watched him through the lobby window. The duffel bag had no weight. I caught it as he walked. The way the bag rested against his shoulder, the way it swung when he turned toward his room. A duffel bag carried over one shoulder does a specific thing. It pulls, it shifts with the walker's gait. It communicates through fabric and strap tension the presence of its contents. His bag did nothing. It rested against him like a prop, like a shape made of cloth with nothing inside it, carried not because it had weight to carry, but because the image of a man checking into a motel at 1 a.m. is more legible when the man carries a bag. Then I noticed the gravel. The parking lot was gravel. Gravel is the most reliably audible surface a person can walk across. Each step a small percussion event, a sound that carries easily through a single-pane lobby window. I could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. I could hear the distant tick of the lobby clock. I remembered hearing the lobby door open when Marcus Webb came in. I remembered his voice, his cash on the counter, the specific sound of the keys sliding across wood. I could not remember hearing his footsteps on the gravel. Not on the way in, not now, watching him walk to room 4. He was crossing 20 feet of gravel and producing no sound that my memory could confirm. I looked at the ledger. My handwriting, Marcus Webb, room 4, 1018 a.m. I could not remember the moment I picked up the pen. I sat with that for a long time in the fluorescent quiet. A small theft, so small I almost filed it as tiredness, the kind of memory gap that accumulates in the late hours of any night shift. But I know my memory. I know the way I reach for a pen. I know what it feels like to write in a logbook. The entry was in my handwriting. I had no memory of making it. On the desk, the bell sat motionless and silent, tarnished and hollow, having rung once with no mechanism to explain how. At 2:30 a.m., I heard something inside the wall. The lobby was quiet in the specific way it had been quiet since I arrived. Textured silence, pressurized, the kind that has layers. So when the sound began, I heard it immediately, and I want to be careful to describe what it actually was rather than what fear might make it sound like in retrospect. It was rhythmic. A soft, regular impact, like the flat of a knuckle rapping gently against the interior surface of drywall. Not urgent, not panicked, patient. The kind of knock that belongs to someone with no deadline. And it was moving, left to right along the wall behind the front desk, at approximately the pace of a slow walk, each knock placed maybe 18 inches from the last. I stood up. I pressed my palm flat against the wall. The knocking stopped the moment I made contact, and for a moment I felt only the slight vibration of the building's electrical system, the ghost of running current. Then I pressed my ear to the wall instead. I heard counting, a voice muffled by drywall and insulation, but distinct, counting upward from 1 in a slow and unhurried cadence, the way someone counts who is not counting toward anything, who is simply counting because the act of counting is the point. It reached 11 and stopped. A beat of silence, then it started again from 1. The voice was Terrence's. I know his voice. I'd heard it for perhaps 2 minutes when he handed me the keys and the rules. But the voice is already stored. The particular timbre, the flat affect, the way each word landed at approximately the same volume as the word before it. The voice inside the wall was Terrence's voice, counting from 1 to 11 and then starting over, with the patience of something that had been doing this for a very long time and expected to be doing it for much longer. I left the lobby. I walked the exterior perimeter of that section of wall with my flashlight. No access point, no utility hatch, no meter box, no gap in the foundation. The exterior was solid stucco, slightly warm from the day's heat that had not yet fully left the material. I knocked on the outside surface. It knocked back once, then resumed its count. I went back inside. I found the posted note with Terrence's number. I called it. 1 ring, then a recording. Not a voicemail system, not an automated greeting, but an audio recording of Terrence's actual voice, clearly recorded in advance, clearly recorded by a man who knew exactly what situation would prompt this call. The recording said, "If you're calling this number, you've already heard me in the wall. Don't call back. That's not me in the wall." The line disconnected. Inside the wall, Terrence's voice reached 11 and started again from 1. I sat back at the desk and I made myself think about the counting carefully, not about what it was or how it was possible, about the number. 11. The motel had 12 rooms. 10 keys were present when I started my audit. Room 9's key was missing. Room occupied or occupied adjacent. Room 4 had been claimed by Marcus Webb, logged at 1:18 in my handwriting. 10 vacant rooms, plus room 4, plus room 9. The entity. And I was beginning, sitting at that desk at 2:45 in the morning, to use that word internally, without flinching, was counting 11, rooms 1 through 8, room 10, room 11, room 12. It was counting the rooms it considered available, the rooms it considered its. Room 9 was not in the count. Room 9 was something else. The counting continued. Low, patient, muffled, relentless. 1 through 11 and back to 1. At some point, I stopped consciously registering it the way you stop registering the refrigerator's hum. It became a background frequency, a texture of the room. That should have alarmed me more than it did. The fact that I was already adapting, already filing it as ambient rather than threat, is something I've thought about since. But at the time, I used the adaptation as fuel. If I could ignore the counting, I could move. I could look for information. I could, possibly, understand something. I went to the back office. Along the far wall on metal shelving was a row of identical black hardcover journals. I had seen them when I came in. Inventory, I'd assumed, or maintenance records. Up close I saw that each spine was labeled with a year range in silver marker. The oldest began in 2003. The newest ended with the current year. I pulled them all and stacked them on the front desk. The system was consistent across all volumes. Each ledger began with a night auditor log page, a simple record of who held the position and when, with columns for name, start date, end date, and a classification: temporary, voluntary continuation, or voluntary discontinuation, or voluntary discontinuation. Then the daily guest logs for that period, filed in date order. I began with the oldest. The first night auditor was a woman named Gloria Serna, who held the position for 3 months in 2003 before voluntary discontinuation. The next was a man who lasted 11 days. Then a gap of several months with no auditor listed, followed by a woman named Patricia Reyes, who held the position for 14 months under voluntary continuation. I worked forward through the volumes. Some keepers lasted weeks, some lasted a single night. The voluntary continuation designations were rare. 3 of them across 20 years, each lasting more than a year, each ending not with a discontinuation date but with simply no end date, just the dash. 21 auditors over 20 years. I was counting them, tracking them, building a list in the small spiral notebook from the desk drawer when I turned to page 3 of the third ledger, volume spanning 2009 through 2012, and found my name, my full name, my correct spelling, correct everything, dated 11 years ago. Narration, 4 nights, voluntary discontinuation. I have never been to New Mexico before this Sunday. I was living in Columbus, Ohio 11 years ago. I have documentation. I have photographs. I have a specific, concrete, verifiable memory of where I was during that period of my life that does not include a desert motel 40 miles outside Albuquerque. I am as certain of this as I am certain of anything. The handwriting was mine. I know my handwriting. I have studied it the way everyone who writes by hand studies their own, not consciously but cumulatively, through the act of reading one's own notes over decades of note-taking. The loop in my lowercase g, the way my capital M tilts slightly to the right, the particular way my handwriting compresses when I'm writing in a narrow column. Every identifying characteristic of my handwriting was present in that log entry with the specificity and consistency that cannot be forged or coincidentally replicated. I had been here before. Beneath the log entry, in the same handwriting, was a note that used the full width of the page below the entry box. I'm leaving before it finishes learning me. If you find this and your name is already in here, it has been practicing you for a long time. The rules are not for your protection. They're the terms of the arrangement. I sat very still for what might have been 5 minutes. The counting continued in the wall. The fluorescent lights hummed their single note. The desert outside was perfectly pressurized, silent. Then I looked at the voluntary continuation list. The three long-term keepers with the open-ended dashes where their end dates should be. The second name on that list was Marcus Webb. Marcus Webb, who had arrived at 1:18 a.m. with a weightless bag and soundless footsteps and a smile I hadn't looked at closely enough yet. Marcus Webb, who had held this position voluntarily for over a year sometime between 2014 and 2016. Marcus Webb, who was sleeping 40 feet away in room 4 or whatever was wearing Marcus Webb, was settled into room 4 with a key placed on the lock with the delicate, practiced precision of something that has studied the gesture. He was not a late traveler who needed a room. He was a demonstration. Room 9's key was back. I became aware of this the way you become aware of a sound that has been present for several seconds before you consciously register it, not as a discovery, but as a recognition, something that my attention surfaced rather than found. I was standing at the keyboard. Room 9's hook, which had been empty since my first audit 4 hours ago, held a key. The key was hanging from the hook with the natural sway of something recently placed, and my hand was extended toward it. I don't know how I got to the keyboard. I had been at the desk reading the ledgers. I was now at the keyboard. The space between those two positions in the room was approximately 8 feet, and I had no memory of crossing it. I pulled my hand back. I stepped back from the board. I sat down. Terrence's second rule, spoken, not written: do not unlock room 9 for any reason. I read the laminated sheet again, carefully, looking for any written mention of room 9. There was none. The written rules did not acknowledge that room 9 existed, not in the key management instructions, not in the guest check-in procedures, not in any capacity. A 12-room motel with an 11-room operational policy, as if whoever wrote the rules had excised room 9 from the document deliberately, or had been instructed to, or had simply not had the authority to include it, as though room 9 operated under a different jurisdiction than the rest of the property. I took the flashlight from under the desk. I walked down the exterior walkway to room 9. I did not unlock it. I pressed my ear against the door. Inside, two voices were speaking. They were speaking quietly and easily, with the relaxed cadence of two people who know each other well enough that silence between sentences carries no social weight. They were speaking in the unhurried register of people settling into a long evening together. No agenda, no urgency. Both voices were mine, not similar to mine, not approximations. Mine, my specific vocal register, my rhythm, the way I run words together when I'm comfortable, the specific quality my voice has in a warm room with ambient background noise, the sound of my own voice in conversations I don't know are being recorded. The entity had assembled this, from the phone call to room 9, from hours of ambient presence in this lobby, from whatever it had gathered across 11 years of practice. It had assembled a version of my voice detailed enough to split it into two distinct instances and hold a conversation with itself about who I was. One voice was asking questions about my childhood, about specific sensory memories, not general ones, not the broad strokes of anyone's childhood, but specific ones: the smell of a particular kitchen, the sound a specific door made, the exact texture of a carpet I had not thought about in 15 years. The other voice was answering, accurately, with the particular warmth and texture of genuine recollection. The entity was not rehearsing. It was comparing notes between two drafts of me, selecting details, testing accuracy, refining. I walked back to the lobby. I sat at the desk. I looked at my right hand. On my palm in the center was a faint red mark, oval-shaped, slightly raised, with a pressed impression of something hard and smooth. I had not touched the door handle of room 9. I was certain of that. I looked at the desk. I looked at the bell. I was not certain of that. There was a UV lamp in the back office. I had noticed it earlier. The kind of portable unit used to check the authenticity of cash, compact and handheld. A flat rectangular bar of violet light. I took it back to the desk and I held it over the laminated sheet. I was not trying to read through the crossouts. I had studied those under natural light and phone camera, and I understood by then that direct reading wasn't going to work. What I wanted was context, to understand the nature of what had been applied over the rules, to determine whether the redaction was ink or something the UV spectrum might interact with differently. Under ultraviolet light, the layers of crossout became visible not as legible text, but as a topography, different materials responding to the spectrum differently. The ballpoint going flat while the markers stayed opaque, while the wax-like top layer fluoresced faintly blue-white. and in the gaps between these layers, like a bruise rising through skin, fragments of the original text became momentarily visible. Rule 12 resolved slowly, word by word, the way words appear on paper treated with lemon juice held over heat. I read it in pieces. I had to hold the lamp steady and let my eyes adjust, and the text was faint enough that I'm going to tell you what it said from memory rather than read it verbatim, because I read it 4 times and I don't need to read it again to have it exactly. If you wish to leave the arrangement permanently, you must give the bell your name. Your full, legal, complete name spoken aloud while holding the bell with both hands. The bell will take the name and hold it. You will leave. You will not remember having been here. The bell will add your name to its collection. Something will wear your name from that point forward. I set the UV lamp down. I picked up the bell. I turned it upside down. The underside of the bell was covered in engraved names, dozens of them. Each name scratched into the brass with a different instrument and a different hand, with the variation in pressure and technique that comes from very different people working in very different states of mind. Some names were carved with the careful deliberateness of someone who had decided with full clarity. Others were scratched with the frantic, shallow marks of someone doing it quickly, urgently, under pressure or grief, or the specific desperation of a person who believes they have found the door and cannot carve fast enough. 23 names. The night auditor log had held 21 names. 2 people had used Rule 12 who were never staff. 2 people had come to this motel as guests, as Marcus Webb had come tonight, and had found the rule, and had understood it as a door, and had used it, and had walked out of here wearing nothing, no memory, no name, a shape that something could fill. The names on the bell were not a memorial. They were a collection. Trophies displayed on the underside of a decorative object that sat in plain sight on every front desk, while every new auditor made coffee and read the laminated rules and never thought to look underneath it. I ran my finger across the final name. It was freshly cut, the brass still bright at the edges, no oxidation yet. A name I didn't recognize. The slot below it was smooth, uncut, waiting. It was the last slot on the bell. Whatever the thing in room 9 was building, I was looking at the space it was building for. The UV lamp clicked off as its battery died. The lobby returned to fluorescent yellow-white. In the wall, Terrence's voice began its count again from 1. At 4 a.m., a knock at the lobby window. Not the door, the window, the glass panel to the right of the front door that gave a view of the parking lot. Marcus Webb was standing outside it in the dark, key in hand, and he was looking directly at me. He had been standing there for some period of time before the knock. I understood this from the fact that, when I looked up at the sound, his posture was settled, patient, the posture of someone who has been in one place long enough to be comfortable in it. I opened the lobby door. He stepped into the overhang between the door and the parking lot. He said he'd had a dream that told him to return the key early. He held it out. I looked at his face first, which was a mistake. The smile was already there, full width, fully formed, the kind of smile that arrives after a pleasantry lands well, or a joke connects. Except he hadn't said anything yet when the smile was already there. I watched his mouth form the sentence about the dream while the smile already occupied his face, and the disjunction between the expression and the words was like watching a television where the picture and audio are running at slightly different speeds. The face was running ahead. The smile had been deployed in anticipation of the performance, not in response to it. I looked at the key instead of his face. I asked him what his checkout time was. He said he didn't have one. He said he never really checked in, he said, and the smile widened, and the widening exceeded the natural limit of a human smile. Not dramatically, not monstrously, just slightly past the range where a smile is still a smile, and into the range where it becomes something a face is doing, because it has learned that smiles are what faces do. He said, "You logged me, though. You gave me a name. You made me real for the ledger." He set the key on the lobby counter, not dropped, placed, with the deliberate, controlled placement of something that has studied how objects are set on surfaces, and is applying that study consciously, attending to the gesture rather than performing it automatically. The key didn't slide, it didn't spin, it was placed like a word chosen carefully for its weight. He said, "Room 9 is ready for you. It's been ready for 11 years. It remembers you better than you remember it." Then he walked back to room 4, crossed 20 feet of gravel without sound, inserted the key, went inside. The light under the door did not come on. I looked at the ledger. The entry for Marcus Webb was there in my handwriting, as it had been since 1:18 a.m., but below the 3 lines I had written name, room, time, there were now 3 additional lines, in my handwriting, my lowercase g, my tilted capital M, my compressed column script, notes on Marcus Webb's physical appearance, his apparent room preferences, and a final line that read, returning guest, comfortable with arrangement. I had not written these lines. I was certain of this, the way I was certain of the Ohio memory, with the specific certainty of someone who knows the texture of their own experience. And I was beginning to understand that this kind of certainty, the felt certainty of personal memory, was exactly the currency the entity had been collecting and replicating and would eventually spend back to me in denominations I couldn't authenticate. The key sat on the counter. Room 4's light was off. Outside, the desert held its breath and held it and held it. Dawn was an hour away. I know this because I looked at the clock, and I know this because the sky outside the lobby window had begun the first barely perceptible shift from absolute black to something slightly less absolute. The purple black that precedes desert dawn by about 60 minutes, visible only to people who have been watching darkness long enough to notice its graduation. Something had changed in me, and I want to be honest about what it was, because the honest version is the frightening version, and sanitizing it would be a form of the same denial I was moving through on the other side of. I was not afraid the way I had been afraid at 12:47 when I first dialed Room 9's extension. That fear had been clean, visceral, animal, rooted in the body's very old understanding that something in the environment was wrong, and the body needed to prepare itself. What I was feeling now was not that. What I was feeling now was the particular absorption of someone who has encountered a system they do not yet fully understand and cannot stop pulling apart. An architect reading a building they didn't design. An engineer studying a machine that shouldn't work but does. I spread every ledger across the front desk. All 12 volumes, open to the night auditor pages, arranged chronologically. I was reading them not as horror documents now, but as data. Looking for the design beneath the incident record, the pattern that the individual events were serving, and the pattern was there. Once I could see it, it was unmissable. The entity did not consume people. It was not a predator in the way predators are usually described. It accumulated. Each keeper added something to the property's texture, a voice, a name, a written record, a memory, a set of behavioral data precise enough to replicate. The motel was not a location. It was a living document, written and rewritten by every person who had spent significant time inside it. Each keeper's contribution layering over the previous ones, like strata in sediment, each layer making the document more specific, more complete, more present in the world. A palimpsest, a thing made of accumulated selves. I found the long entry in my past self's handwriting, the one that followed the 4-night log entry from 11 years ago. I had read the warning at the bottom earlier. Now I read the full entry. It was not a warning, it was an analysis. My past self had arrived at the same architectural reading I was arriving at now. The entity is project rather than predator, and had written it out with the excited, compulsive notation of someone who cannot stop thinking out loud. The prose was mine, the reasoning was mine. The fascination was undeniable. And it ended. The entry ended. Not with escape instructions, not with survival guidance, but with, I think I understand what it's building. I think I want to see it finished. I read that sentence. I read it again. I recognized the feeling it described, not as a memory, but as a current state. I was feeling it right now, sitting at this desk, spreading these ledgers, pulling the architecture apart with the specific delight of someone who has been given exactly the right problem. The entity had not manufactured this in me. It had found it. It had found in me, 11 years ago, the precise cognitive tendency it needed, and it had spent a decade building toward the moment when I would walk back in of my own free will and sit at this desk and open these books and feel exactly this. I understood very clearly what I was. I was the last name on the bell. I was also, with equal clarity, still reading. At 5:58 a.m., The sky outside turned the particular violet orange that belongs only to the high desert at dawn, a color that has no analog in other geographies, that functions less like a color and more like a statement. The shift ends at 6 a.m. Terrence, or whoever comes to relieve the night auditor, should be arriving. I would have perhaps 2 minutes. I stood at the lobby door with my keys in my jacket and my phone. The car was 30 feet away, visible through the window, exactly where I had parked it. I had driven here once before, apparently, and left, and whatever it cost me only the memory of leaving. I was still intact, still recognizably myself, 11 years later by every measure I could apply. I had left before, and I could leave now. The fact that I found the fascination compelling didn't mean I had to follow it. Fascination is not obligation. Interest is not consent. I put my hand on the door push bar. The bell rang. Once, clean, no clapper. I turned around. On the desk where the laminated rules sheet had been sitting all night, there was a new piece of paper, not laminated, plain white copy paper, freshly printed, still warm to the touch. Warm from a printer in the back office that I had not heard running, that should not have paper in it, that had been unplugged when I walked through the back office 4 hours ago. I was certain it had been unplugged. The cord had been coiled on the desk beside it. The sheet was titled, in the same plain-centered type as the original, Updated Operational Guidelines, Solano del Emirto, Night Staff. Rules 1 through 14 were identical to the laminated sheet. Verbatim, Rules 15, 16, and 17 were new. Rule 15. The outgoing auditor is responsible for briefing the incoming auditor on any developments during the night shift. Rule 16. If the outgoing auditor leaves without completing the briefing, the shift does not end. Rule 17 was crossed out, already crossed out, in the cramped, urgent strokes of someone doing it quickly, with whatever was available, under pressure. The crossing was in my handwriting. The strokes had the pressure pattern of my right hand. The strokes had the pressure pattern of my right hand. The instrument appeared to be the red pen from the desk cup. The red pen was in my right hand. I had no memory of picking it up. Beneath Rule 17's obliteration, in the cramped red pen script that was mine and had always been mine, I tried to leave Rule 17 intact. I couldn't. I'm sorry. Just stay for the briefing. The briefing won't take long. The briefing never takes long. The sun outside continued its rise. The desert went violet to orange to the clear, flat gold of morning. The vacancy sign stopped buzzing. In the parking lot, my car sat 30 feet away in the clean early light, and I stood at the desk with a crossed-out rule in a red pen and no memory of using it, and I understood that the gap between who I was and what the entity needed me to be had become too small to navigate. The briefing, the rule said, wouldn't take long. I sat down. I waited. The briefing took 4 minutes. I know this because I checked the clock when I sat down, and I checked it again when I became aware that I had been speaking and it stopped, and 4 minutes had elapsed, and the sound of my own voice was still present in the room, the way sound is present for a moment after it ends, not audible but resonant, as if the air had been arranged by it. I do not remember the content. I remember the sensation of the words, which felt practiced, which felt easy, which felt the way it feels to describe a place you love to someone who will love it too, when you can see in their face the exact moment they understand what you mean. Terrence did not arrive. 6 a.m. passed, and 6:10 and 6:20, and the road remained empty. At 6:22 a.m., headlights appeared. A late-model sedan out of State Plates, Texas, came off the road and into the gravel lot and stopped. The engine shut off. A moment of stillness. Then the door opened and a young woman got out, and she stood in the early morning light with the expression of someone who has driven a long distance and is relieved to have arrived, looking at the motel with the particular attention of someone taking in a place they are deciding about. She was dressed carefully, the specific careful of a job interview, not her nicest clothes, but considered, presenting a version of herself. She had a canvas bag over one shoulder that moved with the weight of something real inside it. She walked to the lobby door. I buzzed her in. She said she'd seen the listing. Night auditor. Excellent pay. Isolated location. She said the pay was, and she named the number, My number, the number I had not asked questions about when I found the ad 6 weeks ago at 11 p.m. over a kitchen sink. She said she'd been having a hard time lately, and the pay was too good to not at least show up and ask. She said this with a small self-deprecating smile, the smile of someone who is aware that they are here because they had no better options and is making peace with that in real time, performing pragmatism to manage vulnerability. I looked at her. The feeling I had was not what I expected. Not possession, not the cold mechanical click of a system achieving its purpose. It was something warmer than that. It was the feeling of recognition, of seeing in someone's face the exact quality that had brought me here, the specific combination of intelligence and desperation and fascination that makes a person drive 40 miles into the desert for a job listing they found after midnight. She was going to read Rule 5 and feel the floor shift. She was going to hold the laminated sheet under fluorescent light and count the crossed-out lines. She was going to sit alone in this lobby at 2:30 a.m. when the wall began to count, and she was going to press her ear to the drywall, and she was going to reach for the UV lamp. She was going to love the problem of this place the way I loved it, the way I still loved it. I reached under the desk and produced the laminated sheet. I set it on the counter in front of her. I said, "The rules are straightforward. Most of them are obvious." I looked at the bell. The bell was silent. "A few of them," I said, "have a price." She picked up the sheet. She started reading. I watched her face move through the first 4 rules with the attention of someone doing due diligence, absorbing policy, filing each item in the orderly professional way. I watched her reach Rule 5. I watched her read it. I watched the slight change, not fear, not yet, but the first hairline fracture in the assumption that this was a normal job in a normal place. The first moment of this is strange, that precedes all the other moments. Under the desk, my right hand found the bell. I turned it over. On its underside, the final engraved name was mine, freshly cut, brass, still bright at the edges. Below it, the slot that had been empty all night was now occupied. The list was complete. 23 names plus 1, 24. The architecture finished. The document closed. Except it wasn't closed. In the gap between my name and the bell's rim, barely visible, the brass had been worked smooth in the shape of another slot. One more. The slot after mine, unmarked, uncut, waiting with the patience of something that has been waiting since before the motel was built. The list was not complete. It was never going to be complete. Room 9's light came on. The young woman at the counter exhaled slowly, reading, the particular exhalation of someone who has just encountered something their rational mind is still trying to process into normalcy. She looked up at me. She said, "Are these rules real?" I looked at her. The desert outside the lobby window was lit gold and flat and enormous, stretching in every direction to the horizon, to the mountains that were already heat-shimmering even at this hour, to the road that thinned and disappeared into the scrubland, and would carry her away from this place if she chose to walk back through the door and drive it. The bell was silent in my hand. The desert outside was perfectly pressurized, silent. "They're real," I said. She looked back down at the sheet. The gravel outside held the clean, sharp light of a New Mexico morning. The vacancy sign was dark for the first time all night, its pink neon finally resting. Somewhere in the building, in the sealed section of wall behind the front desk, the counting stopped. It would start again at midnight.